The Kurdish forces explained the nation without a state that changed the Middle East. The Middle East is filled with powerful armies, rival governments, militant organizations, yet hidden among them is a force that doesn't even represent an independent country. For decades, Kurdish fighters have shaped the outcome of wars in Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. They have fought alongside the United States against ISIS, battled Turkish troops across mountain borders, defended autonomous regions, and became one of the most influential non-state military forces in modern history. But who exactly are the Kurds? Why are there so many different Kurdish armies? Why does one Kurdish force cooperate with Washington while another is designated as a terrorist organization by the United States? Why do countries like Iraq, Syria, Turkey, and Iran all view Kurdish armed movements through completely different lenses? To understand today's conflicts in the Middle East, we shall have to dive deeper into the entire Kurdish conflict. They are often described as the world's largest nation without its own state. Spread across 4 countries by borders drawn after the First World War, those borders divided a single people into separate political realities, creating multiple Kurdish movements with different goals, allies, and enemies. Over time, some evolved into official regional armies, others into insurgencies, and still others into international patterns in the fight against ISIS. In this presentation, we will understand the origins of the Kurdish people and explain why there isn't just one Kurdish military force, examine the major organizations operating across the region, and explore why these groups continue to play such a critical role in Middle Eastern geopolitics. Chapter 1: A Nation Divided by Borders. To understand the Kurdish forces, we have to first understand the Kurdish people themselves. The Kurds are an ethnic group with a history stretching back thousands of years. They have their own language, cultural traditions, and a strong sense of national identity. Yet, unlike Arabs, Turks, Persians, they never secured a permanent independent state in the modern era. Today, an estimated 30 to 40 million Kurds live across a mountainous region spanning southeastern Turkey, northern Iraq, northern Syria, and western Iran. This area is often referred to as Kurdistan, not as a universally recognized country but as a historical homeland of the Kurdish people. The turning point came after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire following the First World War. Early diplomatic proposals briefly considered creating a Kurdish state, but shifting geopolitical interests quickly changed those plans. The borders established by later international agreements left the Kurdish people divided into several newly established or expanded states. Overnight, millions of Kurds became minorities inside their own countries whose governments often prioritized a single national identity. Each country developed its own approach to the Kurdish equation. Iraq eventually granted significant autonomy to its Kurdish regions. Syria's civil war created space for Kurdish self-rule in the northeast. Iran's experienced periodic Kurdish unrest while maintaining firm central control. Turkey, home to the world's largest Kurdish population, has fought an armed conflict with Kurdish insurgents for decades. These different political environments produce different Kurdish movements. Instead of one unified national army, multiple organizations emerged, each responsible to local realities, pursuing different objectives and forming different alliances. Some became official security forces recognized by governments. Others evolved into insurgent organizations. Understanding these distinctions is essential because treating all Kurdish forces as a single entity oversimplifies one of the Middle East's most complex political and military landscapes. Chapter 2: Why there isn't one Kurdish army. From the outside, it is easy to assume that all Kurdish fighters belong to the same movement. In reality, there is no single Kurdish army, no unified chain of command, no central political leadership representing every Kurdish community. Instead, several major organizations have emerged over decades, each shaped by the country in which it operates in and political condition it faces. In northern Iraq, the Kurdish armed forces are known as the Peshmerga, a name that roughly translates to those who face death. Unlike many other Kurdish groups, the Peshmerga are the official military forces of the autonomous Kurdistan regions of Iraq. They operate military bases, secure international borders, and coordinate with the Iraqi government while maintaining a significant degree of independence. They have also received training and equipment from Western countries, particularly during the campaign against ISIS. Across the border in Syria, the most prominent Kurdish force is the People's Defense Units, or the YPG. During the Syrian civil war, the YPG expanded rapidly as government's authority collapsed in large parts of the country's north. Eventually, it became the backbone of the Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF, a larger coalition that includes Arab, Assyrian, and other local militias supported by the United Nations and the United States. The SDF became one of the most effective ground forces in the international campaign to defeat ISIS. The situation is very different in Turkey. There, the Kurdistan Workers Party, better known as the PKK, has fought an armed insurgency against the Turkish state since the 1980s. The conflict has claimed tens of thousands of lives and remains one of the region's longest-running armed struggles. Turkey, the United States, the European Union, and several other countries designate the PKK as a terrorist organization, creating a major point of tension whenever Kurdish politics are discussed internationally. Although these organizations share Kurdish identity and in some cases historical or ideological connections, they do not function as one military force. Each has its own leadership, objective, alliance, and legal status. This distinction explains why one Kurdish group may receive military support from Western governments while other faces international sanctions to terrorist designations. Chapter 3: The Rise of Kurdish Forces Against ISIS. For decades, Kurdish armed groups remained largely regional actors known mainly within the Middle East. That changed dramatically in 2014 when the self-proclaimed Islamic State, or ISIS, launched a lightning offensive across Iraq and Syria. Entire cities fell within days, national armies retreated, millions of civilians fled their homes. As ISIS advanced, one group after another collapsed, but the Kurdish forces largely held their ground. In northern Iraq, the Peshmerga rapidly mobilized to defend the Kurdistan region after ISIS captured vast territories that threatened the city of Erbil. Backed by the coalition airstrikes, they halted the advance, protected critical infrastructure, and later helped liberate towns that had fallen under ISIS control. Their resistance prevented ISIS from gaining complete control over northern Iraq and helped stabilize one of the few relatively secure areas in the country. Across the border of Syria, the Kurdish YPG became internationally recognized during the Battle of Kobani. ISIS expected the border city to fall quickly, but Kurdish fighters mounted a determined defense that lasted for months. Supported by intensive US-led coalition airstrikes, they gradually pushed ISIS back. Kobani became more than just a military victory. It became a symbol that ISIS could be defeated. Following that success, the United States deepened its partnership with the newly formed Syrian Democratic Forces. Together, they launched a series of offensives that dismantled ISIS's territorial control across northeastern Syria. One city after another fell until the group's final stronghold at Baghuz collapsed in 2019, effectively ending the so-called ISIS Caliphate. These victories transformed the international image of the Kurdish forces. They were no longer viewed simply as a regional militias but as one of the most capable ground forces fighting ISIS. Yet military success also created new political challenges. As Kurdish controlled territory expanded, neighboring countries, especially Turkey, became increasingly concerned that these gains could strengthen Kurdish autonomy and inspire similar movement across their own borders. The defeat of ISIS didn't end the conflict, it merely shifted the focus towards a new geopolitical struggle over the future of Kurdish power in the Middle East. Chapter 4: Why Turks see some Kurdish forces as a threat. To many Western observers, the Kurd forces became synonymous with the fight against ISIS. But Turkey views the situation through a very different strategic lens. For Ankara, the central issue is not who fought ISIS, but whether certain Kurdish organizations are connected to Kurdish Workers Party, or PKK, which Turkey has battled for more than 4 decades. Turkey argues that the Syrian People's Defense Units, or YPG, is closely linked to the PKK through shared leadership, ideology, and organizational history. Because of these alleged ties, Turkish officials maintain that strengthening the YPG also strengthens a movement that considers a direct threat to Turkish national security. The United States, while recognizing the PKK as a terrorist organization, has distinguished the Syrian Democratic Forces from the PKK for the purpose of fighting ISIS. The difference in policy has been one of the most persistent sources of tension between two NATO allies. As Kurdish controlled territory expanded across northern Syria during the war against ISIS, Turkey became increasingly concerned that a continuous Kurdish administered region alongside its southern borders could encourage separatist sentiment among its own Kurdish population. Turkish leaders repeatedly stated that they would not allow what they viewed as a hostile armed entity to establish itself directly across its border. Beginning in 2016, Turkey launched a series of cross-border military operations into northern Syria. These campaigns aimed to push Kurdish-led forces away from the frontier itself and establish what Turkey describes as a security buffer zone. The operations significantly altered the map of northern Syria, bringing Turkish-backed Syrian factions into control of several strategic areas, while forcing Kurdish forces to reposition elsewhere. This conflict illustrates one of the defining realities of Middle Eastern geopolitics. The same armed group can be viewed in completely different ways depending on national interests. To Washington, the Syrian Democratic Force were an indispensable partner against ISIS. To Turkey, elements of the same coalition represented an extension of an organization that it considers an enemy state. These competing perspectives continue to shape military deployments, diplomatic negotiations, and the balance of power across northern Syria even today. Chapter 5: The Future of Kurdish Forces. Today, the Kurdish forces stand at the crossroads. ISIS no longer controls territory as it once did, but the strategic environment around the Kurds has become even more complicated. Their greatest challenge is no longer winning battles on the battlefield, it is navigating the competing interests of regional and geopolitical powers. In Iraq, the Peshmerga remains the official security force of the Kurdistan regional government, but political divisions between the region's domestic and dominant parties continue to affect military coordination. While they still cooperate with the Iraqi government against the remaining ISIS cells, unresolved disputes over territory, oil revenues, and constitutional authority continue to shape relations between Erbil and Baghdad. In Syria, the Syrian Democratic Forces still control large areas in the country and its northeast. They continue to conduct operations against ISIS remnants while administering millions of civilians. However, their long-term position remains uncertain. The United States maintain a limited military presence at any significant change in American policy could alter the regional balance. At the same time, the Syrian government seeks to restore authority over the entire country while Turkey continues to oppose a heavily armed Kurdish-led administration along its border. Across the wider range, the Kurdish question remains unresolved. Millions of Kurds continue to live across 4 different countries, each with distinct political systems and security priorities. Some Kurdish organizations seek greater autonomy within existing states, while others have historically advocated broader political ambitions. These differences mean there is no single Kurdish strategy or universally shared objective. The story of Kurdish forces is therefore not simply about soldiers or military campaigns. It is the story of a people divided by modern borders, shaped by decades of conflict, and positioned at the center of some of the Middle East's most important geopolitical struggles. Whether fighting ISIS, negotiating with governments, or balancing relations with major powers, Kurdish forces and its organizations continue to influence events far beyond the territory they control. Understanding the Kurdish forces ultimately means understanding one of the most enduring Middle Eastern realities. In this region, alliances are rarely permanent. Enemies can become partners, and today's battlefield victories do not necessarily translate into tomorrow's political settlement. Conclusion: a nation without a state, a force that shaped a region. The Kurdish forces occupy a unique position in modern geopolitics. They are not the military of a sovereign nation, yet they have influenced the outcome of wars, controlled large territories, and become indispensable partners for some of the world's most powerful countries. Their story demonstrates that military effectiveness alone doesn't guarantee political recognition or independence. Across Syria, Iraq, Turkey, and Iran, different Kurdish organizations continue to pursue different objectives under different circumstances. Some serve as official regional security forces, others remain insurgent movements. Some cooperate closely with Western governments, while others are designated as terrorist organizations by multiple states. Grouping them all together under a single label ignores the complex political realities that define each movement. The defeat of ISIS elevates Kurdish forces onto the global stage, but it did not resolve the deeper questions surrounding the Kurdish identity, autonomy, and statehood. Those policies remain among the most enduring and sensitive challenges in Middle Eastern politics. As regional rivalries evolve and international priorities shift, Kurdish organizations will likely continue adapting to new alliances, new threats, and new opportunities. For policymakers, military planners, and observers alike, the Kurdish forces illustrate a broader lesson about the Middle East. Power is not determined solely by international recognition or the size of a country's army. Geography, local legitimacy, strategic partnership, and decades of accumulated experience can allow non-state actors to become decisive players in regional affairs. The Kurdish story is, therefore, still being written. Whether future generations witness greater Kurdish autonomy, renewed conflict, political compromise, or an entirely different outcome will depend on decisions made not only by Kurdish leaders but also by the governments of Syria, Iraq, Turkey, Iran, and the global powers whose interests continue to intersect across the regions even today.